Ja, liebe Minister, liebe Gäste, willkommen an der Universität Copenhagen, or the University of Copenhagen, as our official European name is. The Danish Minister for European Affairs, Mr. Nicolai Wammen, has said that the Danish EU presidency will act as a bridge over troubled waters. Of course, the minister was referring to the 1970 song by Simon and Garfunkel. And most likely, he had the troubled economy and maybe the bridge-decorated euro bills in mind. So allow me very briefly to descend into the history of the euro. In the mid-1990s, the National Central Bank bosses met at a secret venue. Escorted by undercover agents with dark suits and sunglasses, they met to discuss the biggest bank secret. What should the new euro bills look like? For centuries, human faces had covered bills in European countries, but the bank bosses just couldn't agree on what famous faces were appropriate. Both Shakespeare and Leonardo da Vinci were dismissed. Fortunately, a graphic designer from the Österreichische Nationalbank came to their rescue. He said, bridges. There is something about bridges and the history of Europe. And now, bridge illustration, designed to evoke the many landmarks within the EU, decorate the euro bills. I believe the bank bosses made a great choice because European bridges represent a connection between countries that share common grounds. And the historical connection was also emphasized by the German unification president, Richard von Weizsäcker, when he visited the university here to speak in this hall at the anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. Mr. Weizsäcker said, thanks to the European Union, now for 60 years we have had peace on this continent. And it has to remain peaceful. This is why I hope, despite all little misgivings, despite all the differences between larger and smaller economies, we really have a common European interest in remaining and having a peaceful development on this continent. End of quote. Today, the bridge seems a fitting symbol for the connection we can hopefully maintain in times of economic turmoil. Now, I'm not an economist, so you may say that I don't have a clue about the problems of European currency. And I'm not an engineer, so I only know very little about bridges. I'm, however, a researcher and an educator, and some would argue that we may indeed be useful as politicians try to cure the European economy and bridge the gap between various European countries and towards the rest of the world. So allow me to make one point about European economy from university perspective. Some of Europe's most important values have been fostered by research, education, and innovation. And in that sense, higher education should be seen as a European gold reserve, which guarantees the value of our past, present, and future currency, fiscal as well as mental. I hope the economic experts who have joined us today will agree with me on that. 3 of our 4 speakers are in fact economy graduates from this university, and Minister Dr. Schäuble, you have studied both law and economy, so I feel quite confident that we will feel economically enlightened after today's debate. Now I'd like to pass the word to Michael Jalner, who is, in addition to being a University of Copenhagen economist, is also an international editor at Politiken, and he is our moderator today. Thank you, Michael. The floor is yours.
Thank you. And just shortly to bid you welcome on behalf of Politiken, welcome to all of you, Mr. Schäuble, Margrethe Vestager, and Professor, and to all of you, of course. We are having this meeting on the threshold just before, on the eve, on an EU meeting for economy ministers and finance ministers. We are also having this meeting at the very same day as there are big riots in Spain, not least in Barcelona, where people are fighting or protesting, demonstrating against big cuts in government budgets. It's on this eve we are asking the questions, which we did in our advertisements before the meeting here. Can the euro survive? Can we hold EU together in this climate? And not least, how do we save the welfare state? We have several EU countries balancing on bankruptcy. We have 24 million people unemployed, and no one really seems to have any clear and quick solution to it. Discussions on your meeting tomorrow will be based, among other things, on a proposal from the EU Commission about introducing what we call a Tobin tax in Denmark, a finance tax. I am happy to bid welcome to two of the major combatants, the man with all the money, the German finance minister, Wolfgang Schäuble, the chairman of the EU presidency, Margrethe Vestager. She is opposed to the finance tax. Mr. Schäuble, you want the finance tax. And we hope that we can set the struggle this night, so we know where we're heading to. But first of all, I will give the floor to Mr. David Dreyer Lassen, who is a professor here from the university, economist and professor since 2007, and you are, among many other things, specialized in political economy. Welcome to you.
Thank you very much, and good evening. 10 minutes is not enough for an academic. It's almost not enough to clear my throat, but we'll see where we head. We are living in a gigantic economic and political experiment, and as has already been said, we don't really know where we're going. So the title of the event today is Europe at a Crossroads, and maybe we don't have a map. Maybe we will have one after today. Just as Michael said, things are unfolding as we speak. So there's a general strike today in Spain. Yesterday, the Tobin tax maybe was on the table again, maybe off. This morning, the head of the Polish central bank suggested a dual currency system for Greece. So things are really happening fast here. So what I'm going to do in my 9.5 minutes is to give you 3 slides on how we got where we are, one on where we are now, and then I'm going to try to put out some things that you can think about maybe for the discussion. So I'm going to take as given today the financial crisis. You could do an entire lecture series on the financial crisis. I'm not going to do that today. But just note that in 2007, 8, 9, most economies suddenly fell off a cliff. Okay? The fall was deep for some, less deep for others. But as you can see on the graph, it was pretty deep. Some are recovering faster than others. But what happens when economic activity falls to this extent? Well, one thing that happens is that public finances, they become worse. Okay? So these are the fiscal balances, so the surplus of a group of countries, including Denmark, but also other countries, from 1995, way before the euro, until 2011, more or less. So I want you to think of 2 things when you see this graph. One is the cliff towards the end. So it actually does worsen public finances to have a crisis. The other one is the dotted line or the broken line. That was the debt ceiling, the limit for how much, or deficit, sorry, that you could have under the treaty. So that was 3% of GDP. The idea of the 3% was never that you should be at the 3% limit all the time, but that you could go there if things got rough. But what you see here is that some countries were there all the time. They were even under occasionally. So we'll get back to that. What happens then? Well then, when public finances worsen, when you know this from your own house economy. If you have enough deficits, then you run up a lot of debt. And suddenly some people are going to get worried if you can repay the debt. That was what happened here. So this is interest rates. That is how much countries have to pay in order to issue new debt. For some countries, they had to pay quite a lot. Greece is the yellow line. Portugal is a sort of brown-gray line, and they are still pretty high as we speak. Restructured their debt. And that led, in broad strokes, to where we are now. So I listed here a number of key challenges. The first one is so big, I'm not really going to talk about it, because I can't really say a lot right now, but I'm sure we'll have a debate. Just note that one of the key issues is if we can have a fund which is big enough to help us out in the future. I'm going to say a bit about improving fiscal governance. So that's the fiscal treaty that was passed. If this is enough, what is the problem? And then I'm going to have one slide on why structural reforms are a good idea, even if maybe they seem harsh, or even if maybe they result in protests and general strikes as we see them today. A bit about limiting the risks of financial crisis, and if I have the time, a few thoughts on economic architecture. So what is fiscal governance? Well, it's my research topic, which is why I'm always happy to bring it up. But it's also incredibly important for how you actually conduct fiscal policy. And that becomes very important if you're in a union with someone. So if you're not, then you can do what you want, you may go bankrupt, and other countries are not gonna see that very much. But if you're in a union with your next door neighbor, then it suddenly matters quite a lot. So that's why we had the rules. So these limits on deficits and debt, they don't come out of nowhere. They come because because you wanted to have an economic union. So now we enter the fiscal treaty. So maybe the old rules weren't enough. So now we have new rules. They're pretty much the same as the old rules to some extent. But this time we have to believe them. And that's one of the issues that we could talk about. That's credibility. So would you like to buy a used monetary union from some of us? And just one thing I think to think about here is one of the things that has been interesting in the crisis that we've seen is the discussion of public finances. So one thing a graph that I like is this one. So this is by the OECD, 2005, way before the economic crisis. They tallied up the number of known instances of creative accounting by countries in the euro. So what you note is that all the countries to the left, with these very high numbers, they, for some reason, are also the countries that had these very high yields. So something is going on, which is not just about being unlucky, okay? There's more to it than that. And I'm not entirely sure the fiscal treaty solves this. Okay, structural reforms. So how do you give that in one graph? What I did here was just focus on the left column. That is an index of a ranking of the world's countries by the World Bank on the ease of doing business. So most people would agree that doing business is a good thing for growth, for the economy. Singapore is apparently pretty good at it. Denmark and the US are pretty high on the list. Some of the countries that are part of the euro are not. So Italy is number 87, just under Mongolia. Greece is number 100, just under Yemen. And not to say anything too bad about Yemen or Mongolia, these are perhaps not the countries that partners in the euro would like to associate with. And this is the background for some of the structural reforms that we're seeing. It's not that we don't like unions. It's not that we'd like economic growth to improve just a little bit. It's that it's pretty bad in some countries. Okay, the financial sector, which is a very hot topic. I'm not going to say too much about it. I'm just going to note that there are differences of opinion. The idea, no matter how you look at it, is that you would want to reduce the risk of future financial crisis, right? Remember the slide I started with said that everything started with the financial crisis. So if it hadn't been for that, we probably wouldn't be sitting here today. Some would also like it to raise revenue. Some, in particular, maybe the European Commission would like its own source of revenue. And one possibility that has been discussed extensively is the token tax, or financial transaction tax. Some economists, most economists maybe, think that it's hard to implement this on a regional scale. There's a leaky bucket, so if there's one hole in the bucket, then all the capital goes there. There's also some debate on whether it's in fact stabilizing. We don't know because no one has really tried it on a scale that matches this. There are other options on the table. A coordinated financial activities tax, more regulation. This gets technical and maybe somewhat boring, but it's incredibly important. So let me just finish off with some thoughts on what you could call the architecture of governance. So some, maybe economists, I really can't tell anymore, maybe it's just my friends who are all economists, I wouldn't know, would say no monetary union without a fiscal union. Okay, so you can't have a monetary union if you don't have a fiscal union to back it up. Now, as a political economist, I would say, well, you can't have a fiscal union without a political union, or popular consent, or EU-wide elections. Now, that's a hurdle. So, where does that come from? I don't think it's possible in the longer term to have a euro without a full fiscal union. And then we're talking another set of cards. One thing that a full fiscal union involves is the willingness for the entire EU population to redistribute from rich to poor regions, to ensure unlucky regions by having money flowing from lucky to unlucky regions. And maybe that's difficult to see as it is now. The final point I want to make is that even though the EU in its forms has been around for a long time, it's nothing compared to what you see in the world. So the US, they signed the Constitution in 1786. So when did they get a central bank? Well, they tried twice. They got a central bank 140 years later in 1913. So it's not something that happens overnight. They only got federal fiscal policy much later. So I'll stop at that. Thank you.
Before I give the floor to Margrethe Vestager, just one practical thing to the press down here I forgot to mention before. There will be a short doorstep press meeting up here just after the public meeting ended, so you will have 15 minutes up here. I'll come back to that. Then I'll give the floor to you, Margrethe Vestager, leader of what we call the radical left in Denmark. You are also economic minister. You are now chairman of EU presidency, or leading the discussion tomorrow. And you're also opposed to the finance tax. It's peculiar to have a minister from a left-leaning government opposing tax on capital, and then have a right-wing politician asking for that. But I hope you will explain that to us. Don't you think the financial sector should be held responsible for all the problems they created? And if you don't want to tax the finance sector, where will you get the money from to stimulate growth? It's needed. Just ask in Barcelona tonight. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you. But one thing is certain, and that is if growth comes from spending, then we should have had a lot of growth.
Very good. Very good.
Because the debts that we are dealing with here, they reflect the fact that there has been a lot of spending. A lot of spending. But it has been spending in wrong structures, in unflexible labor markets, and therefore it doesn't work. And what happened in 2008 was that we lost trust in the financial sector. And we're building up. But what happened with the sovereign debt crisis was that we lost trust in politicians to get ahead of the curve and be able to control public spending. So the task is difficult but simple. We have to rebuild trust. And sometimes I think of it as a paradox. Now it's 10 years ago, I was Minister of Ecclesiastical Affairs, Minister of the Church. But I deal more with faith and trust now Just a few words on the euro, because there has been a lot of sort of drama queen debates about the euro. This was the fault of the euro, this was the crisis of the euro, this was the end of the euro. And some have been sort of very certain that the euro was a wrong construction in the first place because it lacked a financial or fiscal union. And the crisis is indeed a very critical one. But think about what would have happened without the euro. Without the euro, we would have had a currency crisis as well. Countries would have devaluated, trying to push problems from one country to another country in order to gain ability to compete without changing structures. That was what happened in Europe in the beginning of the 90s. And I don't think we want that repeated anyway. Thankfully, most European countries, or all European countries, have chosen or been unable to use devaluation as a tool through the crisis, because the euro ensures exchange rate stability. And that points to the fact that this crisis is not a euro crisis. It's a sovereign debt crisis. It's a crisis which occurs because countries is being crushed under debts which doesn't seem to be able to pay them back. And basically, the euro as a currency had done what it should do. It has delivered low and stable inflation. And that is a fundamental feature of a strong economy. Any consumer, any enterprise appreciate that. What is, of course, to be considered is that we have something here which is European, which is not American, which is truly European, because what we have is a central monetary policy and a decentralized fiscal policy under the responsibility of the member states. And of course, that may be the weak part of the chain. Because the euro, of course, requires member states to conduct sound, credible, sustainable fiscal policies. And they were also saying that euro participation is not a free lunch. It's not an umbrella that you can hide under from bad economic weather. You have to do your job. You have to be responsible and keep your own fiscal house in order. So, yes, the euro will survive the crisis. I'm confident that it will. The EU, and especially the euro area countries, are implementing a comprehensive strategy to address the crisis. And of course it takes time. But with this strategy, including the agreement on a very substantial strengthened economic policy in Europe, I'm sure that the euro will come out of the crisis in a better shape. And a strong and well-functioning euro is not only in the interest of the euro country, it's interest of all of EU, especially, of course, to Denmark, with a fixed exchange rate and with an extreme degree of integration with the euro country. Sitting here with my friend and colleague, Wolfgang Schäuble, which is an honor and a privilege.
For me.
For me. For me. Which is our closest partner. We share interest with a number of the euro countries. And sometimes that is overlooked, being a discussion about euro countries and non-euro countries. That being said, being sort of not overconfident, but having trust in the euro, what we have put on the top of the agenda for the presidency is to implement, because a lot of good decisions have been taken. But no decision is as good as the implementation, because we have to make it work. And Of course, it's a very hard time. Talking about Spain, Greece, Italy, Portugal, Ireland, number of countries facing very strict programs and to bear the burden of a large degree of youth unemployment. But there is no alternative to make sure that we get it right this time. Because what we have to do is to build up confidence. Confidence in order to make Europe back on track when it comes to stronger growth and job creation. If you have no confidence, you will not spend. Enterprises will not invest. Financial sectors, banks will not lend. Spending, investment, lending is a prerequisite for growth. We can't do without it. And we have to make sure that consumers, that businesses, that banks trust politicians to get in control of public spending. And of course, because if we can't control public spending, who's going to pay back the debts and the interests in terms of either higher taxes or cuts in welfare? The consumer. So basically, every mother and father of Europe should think, if the state doesn't want to consolidate, I'll do it. Because otherwise, I just have to pay the bill later on. At a European level, implementation means that we put this new set of rules into reality. And it's important as 23 out of 27 European countries have pending recommendation on fiscal consolidation, including Denmark. We usually think of ourselves as those first row in the classroom, always doing what we're supposed to do. We have recommendations as well. And some are still struggling to win the confidence of markets and to leave the crisis behind. Just one thought here in the end on how Europe can work. Because we have to work, of course, on the European architecture, not only in terms of economics. The new agreement on the fiscal compact, it was signed by 25 countries on 2nd of March. It was an innovation because basically it bridged the commitments that we made under the Growth and Stability Pact within the European Union with national responsibilities. We are taking our promises home. Because if just one sunny Tuesday afternoon we may not pay full respect to what we promised within the Union, well, we do hope that what politicians have passed in our own chamber, in our Folketing, under the headline that on the law we built these countries, we will respect these rules 24/7. There is no doubt that a more ambitious approach to fiscal policies is needed. But the fiscal compact is not the only thing. Fiscal compact is signed by 25 member countries. Then there is the Euro Plus Pact of last year. The Euro Plus Pact and fiscal compact adds complexity to the European rulebook. And while all Euro member states participate in these initiatives, some, but not all, non-Euro member states participate. So in addition to the EU of 27, everyone, and the EU of 17, the Eurogroup, now we have the Europe of 23, the Euro Plus Pact, and the Euro of 25, the Fiscal Compact Europe. And there is a need to ensure consistency and transparency. Because basically there is a risk, not of a fast sort of division, but that the cooperation just quietly drifts apart. And I think that it's right now that we should take very important decisions to make sure that we stay together as a Europe of 27. Because that is what is unique about the European Union. That we are a Europe of 27 and we're still open for new members who fulfill the criteria. And that complexity and that magnitude of cultural diversities and languages and the willingness to stay together as a legally based union, that is the strength. Because we need to make sure that these different formats doesn't split us apart. And I think we need to take that decision now, to agree that the EU of 27 is our path ahead, because that is also the path of the single market. And single market created millions of jobs before, and it will create jobs again if we make it in the new version. We have paved the way out of the crisis. It's not acute anymore. Actually, we can talk about other things before we talk about the crisis when we meet over the European coffee automat. But still, a lot of work has to be done, because passing new rules is very difficult. Obeying new rules is a very hard thing to do, because then we have to be direct and precise and dare to tell one another when we are not on target anymore. But I think that we can do that we can rebuild confidence and trust, not only in European politicians, but also in a more strictly well-regulated financial sector, making sure that the risk of another crisis as the one we had in 2008 will be so much smaller than it were. In doing that, we have to play as one team. Even though we have the Europe of 17, 23, 25, it is the Europe of 27, which is the dream team, and it's still open. Thank you.
Then I will give the floor to Mr. Wolfgang Schäuble, one of the most experienced European politicians. You came into Bundestag in 1972, became minister first time in 1984. Now you're here as a man with the money, as I said before, finance minister of Germany. You also seem to have given up the idea of introducing a financial transaction tax. You cannot have people like Margrethe Vestager on board. We would hope you will answer the question, what is the alternative to a financial transaction tax? Are there any alternative? Or could you envisage a situation where you do not consider yourself as one team, but you enforce an enhanced cooperation between 9 countries, introducing the Tobin tax, and then leaving countries like Denmark outside? Thank you for coming here. We are very honored you would come here, and we are looking forward to your speech. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good evening. I will only make a few remarks because I agree totally with Margaret. And you see, we have a very good president in our ECOFIN. And as always, the best is the president is speaking for all of us. Now, having said this, I would make a few remarks from the position of a member state of the Eurozone. Of course, Denmark is closely linked to the Euro, and what Margaret just said is, I totally agree. I think if we want to understand what's going on, we have to start with the crisis in 2007, 2008, and even the pictures of Professor Larsen were relating to the bank crisis, which was not started in Europe, not in the Eurozone, not in Europe, but in the United States. And the interesting thing is, since this crisis, financial markets became aware that sovereign debt may be a risk. Before, there was no significant spread between Greek and German bonds. Since this bank crisis, the spreads between Greek and German bonds have increased totally unreasonable, But that is how markets work. I don't believe in the rationality of markets. They are very sensitive, but for a long time they don't be aware. And as soon as they became aware of risk, they accelerate. Now what we have to do is to rebuild confidence. And for example, you can see it in a very specific example. Financial markets they are not really sophisticated. And a manager of an investment fund maybe in California or in Singapore, he doesn't know whether Denmark is member of the Eurozone, or Hungary, or Estland. What he knows is, oh, you must not trust in euro, except one country, Germany. Yes, that is the only thing he understands, he knows. Therefore, it's the only explanation why we have in markets actually, once again, we used to have until January, 10 years bond by interest rate by 1.82, what is nonsense. With an inflation rate by 2.5, it's irreasonable to have interest rate by 1.823. But the only reason is they think the only country in Europe you can trust is Germany, what is wrong. But that is the way markets are thinking. Therefore, what we have to do, and we did it. It's very difficult in time to time implementing, but we did it step by step, and we are doing step by step. First of all, member states which have problems have to fight their problems in their own responsibility. Therefore, if member states of the Eurozone have not been able to refinance themselves in markets, we have to help them by programs, Greece, Ireland, Portugal, but only under conditions. Not to torture them, not to punish them, not to educate them, but only if they don't fight the causes of the problems, we will never succeed. And that is the very reason. And that is the very reason we will not accept, for example, Eurobonds or ECB as lender of last resort, because it would always create the wrong incentives for member states. If you take the example of, once I had a discussion with our Italian colleague and Prime Minister, Mario Monti, and when he told me, oh, interest rates for Italy are so high, it was in December last year, it was about 6-7%. I asked him, Mario, what were the interest rate for Italy before Italy joined the Eurozone? They were higher. Greece had much higher interest rate. Joining the Eurozone, they enjoyed for years and years low interest rate, and they forgot, like Italy, to remain competitive. And they lost competitiveness. Therefore, they need the pressure of interest rate to understand what's needed in a world of globalization with a very strong and very competitive economy. Now they are doing, Monti is doing a wonderful job. Spain is doing, I think the labor reform which they have the general strike today in Spain, it's absolutely necessary. If you look at labor market regulation in Spain, you must not be astonished why Spain has a youth unemployment rate by 48%. You can change it in reforming labor market rules. Of course, the decision to be implemented in a political way is always very hard. And Prime Minister Rajoy told his colleagues before he took the decision, it will cost him a general strike. It's quite clear to take the decision, but the decision is needed, and I will not repeat what our president just have said. You can spend money as much as you want. If you don't have the structures, if you don't take reforms, it doesn't work. Therefore, member states have to reduce their deficits because the whole globalized world, IMF, G20, who else? Everyone agreed that the two main reasons of the world crisis have been too high public debts, not only in Europe. By the way, public debts in UK or in the United States is higher than the average of the Eurozone member states. Public debts, too high public debts, and too less regulation in financial markets. If we want to draw lessons from what has happened, we have to change this. Therefore, we are working in reducing in a growth-friendly manner a too high deficit. When I started as finance ministers in the end of 2009. On behalf of the crisis, we had a huge deficit in our budget plan for 2010, and we had to reduce it. And I was asked, even by EU Commission, by my French colleague, Christine Lagarde, by American Treasury, please don't go too fast in deficit reduction, because you will damage growth. My answer was the same as just. The most important thing is to regain confidence without making public opinion in Germany sure that our public debt will be sustainable. We will lose any confidence. And without confidence, you have no economic growth, because investors don't invest, consumers don't consume. 1 year later, when people saw figures of our deficit reduction and our growth rate, they said, okay, it works. It's possible to reduce deficit in a growth-friendly way. Of course, the situation from member state to member state is a little bit different, quite clear. But the general message is you have to balance reduction of deficit with structural reform and to regain sustainable growth. The second issue which we have to fight is in starting the common European currency, we were not able to build a fiscal union. And only having a harmonized, a common monetary policy and no common fiscal and economic policy, a lot of people outside of Europe said it will never work. It will never work. We had two alternatives 10 years ago. We would have had the alternative not to start with the common European currency. I bet we wouldn't have a European currency now. We wouldn't have. Therefore, we decided we will start without a fiscal union. We will try to avoid risks with a pact on stability and growth. It's a pity to say that Germany and France offended it first and damaged it seriously. And now we are drawing the lesson in building a fiscal union now. Therefore, I am optimistic because, as we learned from Karl Popper, crisis in a liberal society, a democratic society is always able to draw lessons from errors. Only non-liberal societies are not able to draw lessons from errors. By trial and error, the liberal society is moving ahead. And now we are proving that we are able to draw lessons. And now we are building the fiscal union in a complicated way, but we are doing. And what we are doing else is we are building, even at the end, something like protection against contagion, having made a bank stress test for all systemic banks to require enough capital to fight contagion. And what we are now, we will discuss it tomorrow morning before our ECOFIN meeting in the Eurogroup, in a more or less formal Eurogroup meeting, what we will have with a new ESM. We had the first lecture in our parliament this morning on this, and we will build an international institution with 500 billion available fresh money, together with the programs already agreed and implemented, partially implemented for Ireland, Portugal, and the new program for Greece. It's about 800 billion euro, what euro together, Eurozone and some part of EU funds as well, about 800 billion euro to fight contagion, to protect our stability and to protect, of course, global economic growth and the stability of global financial markets as well against the danger of. Therefore, I think it's convincing, it's sufficient. We will we will add a similar protection by IMF as we got in the last 2 years, and then I think we can be optimistic that it will work. What we have to avoid, and that is, I 100% agree, that we have the fact that we have 27 member states in the EU and only 70 member states of the common European currency. We have to be very careful that we will not split the European Union as a whole. Therefore, we will only, whatever we are doing, we will take care of our relations to the non-member states of the Eurozone. We respect the decision of any member state to be part of the common European currency or not. That's up to any member state, of course, and Europe is related on mutual respect, of course. But we know that a flexible geography in the EU structure is only for a time being, it's not the ultimate game. The ultimate game is a common integration for all 27 or more member states of the EU. And in the meantime, we have to manage it, to cope closely, to prevent 100% transparency for everyone. I am always in favor to invite the president of the ECOFIN in the Eurogroup, for example, and to be totally, when we discussed all the things to strengthen the fiscal union in the Eurogroup, we discussed it always in the framework of 27 finance ministers, not 17, because we don't want to split. We don't want to be. We will be in close relations, and of course, the decision that 25 member states signed the fiscal compact is a very good proof that we are in the right, and we can manage it. And I would make a last remark, more generally, ladies and gentlemen. Sometimes my constituency is close to Strasbourg. It's a border to France. And there's a man who has been born in 42. I remember the very beginning of European integration, but has a lot to do with the 2 world wars in the first half of last century. We are very happy that we must not tell young generations of students today to avoid another war in Europe. We need European integration. You will only take it, it's a joke. There will be no war in Europe. That is very good. But if we think what will be the role of Denmark, UK, even UK, I'm not sure whether every British man knows, but let's say France or Germany in the globalized world of the 21st century, we will be only able to take our responsibility and to work for our common interests, for a world which will remain sustainable in the very challenging speed of changes when we Europeans have common positions and we do it together. Every one of us, Denmark, Luxembourg, Germany, France, every one of us is too small to play a role in the globalized world, and we depend on each other. Therefore, a common European position, a strong European position is needed, not only for the European, because what has to be the contribution of us Europeans in the globalized world? My understanding is, if you look at the globalized world, we Europeans should tell others that we will work for sustainability in these challenging times. Sustainability in ecological manner, in avoiding that markets are destroying themselves. what is the matter of regulation of financial markets. Maybe we will discuss later on financial transaction tax and so on. I will not do it now. Maybe sustainable in social coherence, what is very important. Maybe sustainable in bridging. And you started with bridges as a European symbol. I think the bridge between the poor and the rich people, and we are rich people, all Europeans are rich people compared to people in Africa, parts of Asia, Latin America, to bridge the gap in this globalized world where we are much closer together than in former centuries. That is the role which Europe has to play. And we can't only play if we do it together. Therefore, European integration is the best contribution we can do for the globalized world in this century. Thank you.
What is striking in what you're saying, you're talking so much about regaining confidence, regaining credibility, all long-term measures. When you hear about people in Spain protesting against cutbacks, unemployment, increasing poverty, don't you understand people could have an idea, yeah, like Maynard Keynes said, in the long run or in the long term, we're all dead. I mean, what will you do now? None of you responded to that. I felt kind of neglected. None of you responded to what would you do with the financial transaction tax. Do you have any short-term measure which could give some hope to people? I just ask this before I leave the floor to you out there.
But look, if you tell people that the financial transaction tax would be a sufficient answer on all the problems you raised, that would not be the truth. Therefore, it's a little bit too. Maybe you are interested in our discussion on financial transaction tax. I can imagine, of course. It's fine. I am in favor, of course, but I think the answer of the questions of Greek people or Spanish people is, of course, we have to tell them, look, we will help and we will secure social stability in Europe as a whole. But the precondition that will be possible is that every member state is regaining competitiveness. And for example, we offered to Spanish government, the former Spanish government, we repeated to the actual, you have so many young people unemployed. We in Germany, on behalf of our demography, have not enough young people ready to be trained. Why don't you send young people to Germany? The reaction in Spain was very interesting. Spanish government said, oh, we have to be careful because 30 years ago we had immigration from Spain, working immigration and so, and we don't want to repeat this. Of course, no one wants. But what was interesting, young people run to German embassy in Madrid to say, where can we ask for training jobs in Germany? It's working on Europe, to use Europe as a labor market for all people all over Europe, or for a training market for young generation, not only for students on the academic level, but only on the professional level, is possible. It's not unreasonable. Most young people speak much better English than myself because I only learned French when I went to school 50 years ago. But and therefore you can go to other member states, to other European countries to be trained. It works. Therefore there are a lot of chances for young people, and we together we can solve the problem. And one of the specific issues is the transaction tax. And if you may, we will discuss it.
You want to answer, or shall I leave it to the floor now? You had an...
Well, it was you who felt neglected.
I did.
Well, if you're comfortable in that feeling, leave it.
I would like you to help me out. Help me out.
Well, can I have the floor then?
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Well, I think there are sort of two strategies here who are competing. There is a politician who insists that we should find money and spend it, and that would be the solution. And then there actually is a European strategy, which says, first of all, we have to stop the accident. We have to handle the crisis, which has been going on now for a couple of months, and actually it's successful. The intervention of the ECB, the things made by the Eurogroup, things have stabilized. And when you have stabilized things, then you can start working on growth. Make financial markets stable, make them give out loans so that enterprises can have their credits, can export, can invest. That is one element. Second element, to make sure that we can trade with other parts of the world. Very concrete trade agreements with other countries, which will enable businesses to employ people because they can sell their goods. Third, that the single market will work within digitalization, services, the next element. And least, but a crucial thing will of course be education and research. And what a lot of countries are preoccupied with is to see what can we do in each country and what can we do with the European budget in terms of making sure that those money are also spent in a growth-friendly way. And I recognize completely this is a social liberal ways of handling and promoting growth and employment. But actually, there is a chance that it might work because those money that you want to collect, they will be collected with the consumers and with enterprises. And thereby it may be contradicting exactly what you want to do. And I have the deepest respect for the Euro countries because they have done what was needed in order to stop the accident and to stop the crisis from contaminating any European country and to be out of control.
Thank you very much. The floor is yours. We will take in 3 questions from the start, from the beginning. Please raise your hands and present. When you have the floor, please tell who you are and then please give a short question. We start up here.
Of the parliament. Do you think that's okay, or is it just one of the many retrenchments you have to accept in order to rescue the European Union? Sorry, I didn't give the introduction. I'm Jana Bjørnsen, I'm a law student at the University of Copenhagen.
And Lykke Friis up here. Do we have a microphone? Coming up here. And then
Thank you very much. My name is Lykke Friis. I'm a member of the Danish Parliament of the Liberal Party, the Danish FDP. But in this country, it's not fast 3%. We have far more than the 3% at the moment in the opinion polls.
In our parliament, FDP has about 15%.
I was referring to the opinion polls, the opinion polls.
It's changing every day.
My question is concerning the future of Europe, where when one reads the communication strategy of the German Foreign Ministry on Europe, very interesting piece of paper, it says that yes, your government acted very strongly to save the euro. Thank you very much for that. But it also says that the support for European Union Germany has gone down, and it also says that there's a major sort of debate about Germany and the rest of Europe, sort of fear of German hegemony and so forth. So what is sort of the political answer to all this with regards to Europe's legitimacy? Do we need a European constitution in your point of view, or where do you see that we go ahead from here after the economic crisis?
Thank you. And then we have the third question from down there. Yeah, right. Standing up already.
Thank you. Anders Lumholst, former student from this university, now employed at Danske Bank. You said in your brilliant speech that Italy and Spain or peripheral countries need the pressure of the interest rates. How will it be in the future? Will it be the interest rates, the markets, do you see the markets as a curse or blessing in this sense, or will it be the rules, the implicit fines, etc., that will determine the future of the euro area, whether or not countries will actually fulfill and meet the targets?
Yes, 3 questions. Who would start? Mr. Schäuble?
I'm sorry, Margaret, it would have been better to ask you than me. But the first question, there is indeed a paper and a discussion. The speaker of the left-wing party in Germany this morning said, yes, the fiscal pact, you can't leave it for eternity. I am a lawyer, and I tell you, this is a typical lawyer nonsense. It's totally nonsense. Because if you look at the Euro Treaty, there is no clause you can leave the Euro. You can't. But I tell you, and I was present, when we discussed with the then Greek Prime Minister and Papandreou and the then Finance Minister Venizelos in Cannes, by occasion of the G20 meeting in Cannes, summit in Cannes, when Papandreou had announced a referendum, to go for a referendum in Greece. And of course, it was totally clear, and it was non-disputed. So the outcome of the referendum would be decisive whether Greece would stay in the Eurozone or not. And no one said, it's impossible on behalf of the treaty. Even Ireland is going for a referendum. And of course, Irish government said, in the consequence, it means we will decide whether we will still leave. And therefore, no one will force any member state who will leave. It's quite clear. It's a way of making discussions of lawyers which are a little bit too sophisticated, and therefore, in the consequence, they are nonsense. I am the one second question who was asking for something like a constitutional treaty. We were careful not to say a constitution for Europe, because you know, in Europe, if you I don't know the discussion in Denmark, but in Germany, if you say we want to have United States of Europe, a lot of people are thinking, no, we will not have a supranational state. And in my understanding, and United States of America indeed are a national state, I think Europe is something new. Of course, member states remain important. National states remain important. But national states lost the monopoly of regulating everything. We can't, on the level of national member state, you can't rule anything. Therefore, the national sovereignty is limited by reality. And therefore, we have to build something new. Parts of the old national sovereignty are to member states, and parts are to the European level, and even parts are to a global level. That's what we call global governance, and we have to work for this as well. To manage this, we need something like a constitution. We tried it with the constitutional treaty. We lost the first round. Then we had what was it in Europe? What was the name of the constitutional? Yes, and then after the referendum in France and Netherlands, we made the Lisbon Treaty. It's not the end of the discussion, and we have to work for this. And once again, but we have to go step by step. And we can only make progress in European integration as far as the sovereigns in member states are ready to do. Happily, political leaders in our democracy are not able to decide what they want to do, but they have always to convince majorities. That is possible. You must not look every day on polls, but in elections also you need to get majorities. Otherwise, you fail in implementing what you think is right, but others are the majority thinking other things are right. And my last remark, what will rule in future? I think we have to find the right balance. We need rules and we need markets. It would be totally wrong, it would be disastrous to destroy markets. But if we let markets without rules and without boundaries, markets destroy themselves, what we could suffer, what we suffered in the financial crisis. We all in Germany, left-wing parties, right-wing, center, we have no right-wing parties, but center parties, on behalf of German history. It's, we don't like right-wing, that is always, of course, but all parties were very in no, but I lost what I wanted to say. It's a pity.
Comes out of joking.
No, I think we all we struggled for the less regulation for financial markets, the better for the banking place in Germany. And at the end, we had no regulation, and all over the world. And what was the reaction? And now we have to find better regulation. And I think financial transaction tax could be one part of a better regulation, but better capital requirements, Basel III, or what we agreed, and salaries and for management and for managers and so on, and what we are doing in CRD4, and what is the job of Danish presidency in implementing, and a lot of things has to be done. But therefore, a right balance between markets and rules is the best way for future.
Okay.
Well, just taking up on that note, because I don't think that one should ever trust the markets to be smarter, because they're imperfect. If we should pay the right price of a liter of gasoline, it would be far more expensive than the almost €2 that we pay now. If the market actually would take in the cost of accidents, of pollution, of sicknesses, etc., it should be much more expensive. But the market doesn't know because it's imperfect. Problem is that politicians are as well. And you should never rely on politicians either. So I think you have to make the balance between the two. You should always challenge the market to be better. But you should always challenge politicians not to try to decide everything on behalf of other people. And I think it's as important to win the trust of consumers and of businesses than to win the trust of markets. Because consumers and businesses are taking decisions on an everyday basis. And that is basically what will create growth and jobs in the end.
And who will be next? Down here, we'll take 3 more, so just raise your hands. Yes, I've got you, the yellow shirt over there.
Okay, fine. I'd like to ask Mr. Schäuble, he said about there not being enough financial regulation. I would agree to a certain extent, but do you not think there's the risk that if you over-regulate, you'd undermine confidence in markets? With banks being reluctant to lend, is there not a danger you risk restricting investment through over-regulation in response to the crisis?
And over here on the 3rd row.
Yes, Jens William Grave. I'm coming from the Baltic Sea NGO Network, Denmark. I have 2 questions. I have heard colleagues of you from other countries said that when you created the internal market, we were very inspired by you can call it the German soziale Marktwirtschaft, a social responsible business life. But the crisis has shown that we have no social responsible business life. So in that way, if you should keep the trust for the citizens, isn't it necessary that you more intensify, regulate the financial sector so that the people don't feel that they are paying for the banks so that they can't go corrupt, and afterwards they also have to pay because you are saving. The second question is...
No, I think we should take one because I want to come around.
I'm doing it very short. The other is, you are speaking about the debts, but shouldn't you also, when you see about financial policy, taking into account the differences in the balance of payments in the EU countries? Is that not also a problem? We have two countries here who have a very big surplus on the balance of payment. Thanks.
And then we'll take one short question from down here. One short, direct.
Yes, my name is Anders Hede. I have a question regarding whether your policy will work. Do you have any kind of historical evidence that a coordinated fiscal consolidation in a low interest environment will produce growth? Historical evidence for that, or do you have any kind of reputable academic theory that confidence can do the trick? I mean, perhaps somebody in the audience could enlighten me. I have never in my study of economics found any model where confidence has this very central role that you are ascribing to it. I think that there's a vast risk that you end up contracting the economies of Europe to a strong degree and ending up like, for example, Heinrich Grüning in Germany.
Thank you. You, Margrethe Vestager, you talk so much about rebuilding trust. Can you oversave, overcut?
Well, maybe that would be an impulse to revise economic models. Because I'm not being at all polemic, I'm very, very serious in that, because I think that there is something which is not truly investigated. The cooperation between game theory, rational choice, how we model economics, to make sure that we actually can grasp how people are thinking and how they behave. And basically, behavior is the core of economics, because economics is a very, very human science. We have to know what people want to do. Markets explains some of it, but definitely not all of it. And we have all kinds of theories about what kind of goods will make what kind of behavior. But what we can see is that consumer trusts have been falling and falling and falling. In Denmark, slightly stabilizing and now maybe taking a little bit off. And we can see that consumers save more than they have done in recent years. Historical high levels of savings. And I see that as a very clear indication that they think if our politicians are not going to get in control of spending, then they will raise taxes or cut welfare, make me pay my children's education, or whatever they can think of if they do not take decisions in due time. And I think that's a very, very rational way of thinking. That if I see ahead of me a mountain of debts and interest rates, then I should prepare. And I think that if you will only make this a debate between Keynes and the other guys, I think you miss very important points, because Europe is so much more than economics. It is 27 different national states with different cultures, different countries, different political ways of handling things, obvious differences between North and South, between East and West. And in order to grasp that, and in order to make it a unique place in the world, we have to think of more than just pure economics. Because basically, I think it's overlooked that Europe was in crisis before the crisis. Before the financial crisis, before the sovereign debt crisis. We are an aging continent. The catalyst of innovation, of the need to find new ways, where is that? Where is our ability to compete in a globalized world? I agree 100% with Wolfgang in saying each European country is too small. We have to find ways to do this together, because if we want to be major, not only players, but major citizens in a global society, we have to work together, and we have to enlarge our comprehensions of how economics work. And I think that's what European politics is about these years. It is to make sure that we build up trust, and of course on a solid basis of knowledge and economics and interest rates and whatever. But it's also politics, because otherwise we just leave it to another market.
Build up whose trust?
Well, I think that the building up of trust between politicians and media would be a new thing on my list.
But are you talking about the Spanish demonstrators' trust or the investors' trust?
Well, one of the things about the Spanish labor market is that it doesn't resemble the Danish labor market at all. And one of the things which I highly appreciate is that our model of flex security and a very open labor market, still, even though we have larger unemployment among young people than we wish to have, and we will try to fight it, there is still much more chance for young people to enter into the labor market here than in Spain. So you will still have to find ways of opening up the labor market to give people a chance to show what they can do, instead of being it a very, very closed thing for the very few.
And Mr. Schäuble, there was also a question about regulation, if we could over-regulate and lose capital.
Yes, I would. I had two questions, and the two questions together are the answer. You had to avoid too over-regulation, but you have also to avoid too less regulation. If you look at financial markets, if you look what happened in 2007, 2008, 2009, there is no one in the finance world who disputed that we need more regulation we had. And there was no, I never got any disputes that a lack of regulation in financial markets was one of the main reasons of the crisis, what happened. And therefore, of course, it would be the wrong lesson from that what happened if we would stick to over-regulation. We have always to find the right balance, and that is always never a stable balance. A balance. You have always to work day for day to keep the right balance. But of course, it's not. If you look at what's going on in markets with all these innovative products, with a huge gap of transparency. For example, to asking for all products and business for central what is zentrale Verrechnungsstelle, central clearing points, to get transparency on over-the-counter business, for example, to get some transparency. What is in the new in these high innovative products? What is in this? I am in favor. That is one of my reasons to work for a financial transaction act, to slow down the speed in the high frequency trade. I think it's not sustainable that more than 90% of all financial transactions have nothing to do with financing the exchange of goods, real goods and services. And if the financial sector is becoming more and more self-reliant and nothing to do with financing the real economy, and even to say, if you look at what's going on, what they do with the profit. Do you really want? You don't need regulations. I think we need, in some way, appropriate way to regulate. On the other hand, I will never do it, and I will give you another answer. Before the crisis, in the Anglo-Saxonian economic world, the German model was always a little bit joked. Oh, this Renanian capitalism and whatever. And for example, the Czech president said, I like market economy without any attribute, because we have a social market economy. After the crisis, if you look if you watch what have happened in the labor market in Germany, and we had a reduction of general gross product by 5.1% in 1 year. Totally, we never have had 5.1 in 2009. But if you look what happened in the labor market, we could manage it very well. And since that, even very British conservatives are looking, social market economies is not only bad, and therefore the right balance is the right answer.
Thank you very much. That was the last answer. Thank you for all your good questions. Thank you for your very good answers, unless I'm not completely satisfied, but I got some. Thank you for sharing your ideas with us. Just before you leave, the press will now come up here. I will ask all in the first row to disappear as fast as possible.